Your testimony here today. There are obviously many more questions not yet answered, and the committee will continue to look into this matter. But thank you very much. Hearing is adjourned.
The U.S. Senate on this Wednesday will continue working on the Farm Bill, setting agriculture, food stamp, and nutrition programs for the next 5 years. A number of amendments are pending, and work is expected to continue on the legislation beyond this week. At 4 p.m. in the Senate, lawmakers will turn to debate on a resolution dealing with Iran sanctions over the country's nuclear program and expressing support for Israel. A vote on that measure is planned for 5 Eastern today. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
And for the opportunities our senators have today to protect and defend our liberties. Forgive them when they miss the mark. Give them strength when they are weak, as you provide them with vision for the task ahead. Engender in them a renewed sense of gratitude for your call to serve their nation and your kingdom. Lord, we again ask you to strengthen everyone affected by the Oklahoma tornado. Bless the victims, the rescue workers, and their families in the days and weeks to come. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 22, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable William M. Cowan, a senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for an hour. Republicans will control the first half, the majority the second half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of S-954, the Farm Bill, managed by Senator Stabenow and Senator Cochran. We'll continue to work through amendments to the Farm Bill today. Progress was made yesterday, and we need to continue working on the amendments. At 4 p.m. today, we'll proceed to the consideration of S-Res 65 regarding Iran sanctions, and the vote on that resolution will be at 5 p.m. today. Mr. President, there are 3 bills to death due for second reading.
The clerk will read the titles of the bill for the second time.
S-1003, a bill to amend the Higher Education Act of 1965 to reset interest rates for new student loans. S-1004, a bill to permit voluntary economic activity. H.R. 45, an act to repeal the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and so forth.
I would object to any further proceedings to all 3 of these bills at this time.
Objections heard. The bills will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Mr. President, last night the Senate Judiciary Committee, after some 24 hearings, several weeks of markup, advanced a common sense, bipartisan proposal to fix our broken immigration system. No one can dispute that it's broken. No one can dispute that it needs to be fixed. I commend the diligent work of the committee, and I'm grateful to everyone who worked those long hours. I will bring a strong bipartisan bill to this. I will bring this bill, which is a strong bipartisan bill, to the floor in June, sometime soon after we return from the Memorial Day work period. Although neither Republicans nor Democrats will support each and every aspect of this legislation, it's gratifying to see the momentum behind these reforms that will make our country safer and help 11 million undocumented immigrants get right with the law. I applaud significantly, Mr. President, the efforts of the Gang of Eight. 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, who showed bravery as they set aside partisanship to address a critical issue facing our nation. Mr. President, there are things I am confident that every one of those Gang of Eight, Democrat and Republicans, there are things, parts of this bill that they don't like. But that's how we move legislation forward, for the greater good, compromise. So I admire their legislative skills and appreciate very much their ability to set aside these partisan differences and move this extremely important bill to the floor. There was other courage on display on the Senate floor yesterday when 2 Republican senators bucked the majority of their party for the good of the country. Senators McCain and Collins, 2 senators that I admire deeply, came to the floor to call on their own party to stop blocking bipartisan budget negotiations. Mr. President, John McCain and I came to Congress together. 1982 we were elected. We spent 2 terms in the House together, and we've been in the Senate together since then. Now, over those many years, more than 3 decades, John McCain and I have disagreed on several things. But I have never lost my admiration for this patriotic man. He is courageous in battle, not only in the fights that take place in a war, but legislative battles. So I am so appreciative that he decided the right thing to do to move forward and see what we could do to get this bipartisan bill done. Bipartisan negotiations started is what I wanted to say. Mr. President, Susan Collins, we've served together a long time in this body. We've worked together on some extremely important measures. I don't need to run through all these, but there are parts of the law of this country that would not be law but for her willingness to move forward and move across the aisle. Again, Susan Collins and I, we disagree on quite a few things, but we agree on quite a few things. So again, the people of Arizona are very fortunate to have John McCain as a senator, and the people of Maine are very fortunate to have Susan Collins as a senator. The reason they stepped forward is because it's now been 60 days, 2 months, since the Senate passed its common sense pro-growth budget. And the question that everyone raises is, why are Republicans standing in the way? And not only are Democrats asking that question, Republicans are asking that question now. We passed a budget. Now, Madam President, Senators McCain and Collins don't think our budget is the best. They think that they could do a better job. But they also understand the legislative process. And that is, you've got to work together, just like the Gang of Eight did get the bill to the floor on immigration. We need to work together to get a budget. The House has passed one. We passed one. Let's go to conference and work out our differences. For 60 days, Republican leaders have objected to a conference of the House of Representatives where we will work out our differences between our budget and our priorities. The difference between our budgets is there. We know that. But we need to work together on our priorities. House Republicans and House Democrats need to come up with what they want, and we'll come up with what we want working with Republicans here. That's what conference is all about. In a conference, it's not just Democrats from the Senate that are on that conference committee. Republicans will be on it also. And just like in the House, it won't be all Republicans. It will be Democrats also. The only explanation Republican leaders have given for their endless obstruction is this. They refuse to negotiate unless we agree in advance to let them have their way. Yesterday, the senior senator from Arizona and the senator from Maine, both Republicans, condemned that. They said it was hypocrisy. That's my word, not theirs, but they can define it any way they want. The point is that they've been calling for regular order here for several years, and now they have the chance for regular order, and they're walking away from it. Senator McCain called obstruction by his fellow Democrats a little bizarre. I've used that also to describe this gridlock that we have here. Senator Collins agreed it was ironic, at least is what she said. A senior senator from Maine went on to say, quote, "We have called repeatedly for a return to regular order in this body." Well, regular order is going to conference. We agree, Mr. President. We have a pro-growth budget that we'll proudly defend. House Republicans should be ready to do the same with theirs. I don't know why my Republican colleagues here in the Senate are so afraid for an open process. A conference committee report will need both Democrat and Republican votes to pass. So do my Senate Republican colleagues not trust their House Republican colleagues to hold the line on their priorities? Congress must set sound long-term fiscal policy through the regular order of the budget process and through compromise. But Democrats and Republicans will never find common ground if we never get to the negotiating table. On another subject, Mr. President, Congress has worked hard and compromised often over the last 4 years in order to reduce the deficit and reverse the trend of rising debt that began under President Bush. That work's paid off. We've reduced the deficit by about $2.5 trillion. But as our nation has succeeded in setting a course of financial responsibility, students across the country have struggled to do the same. The rising price of higher education puts college out of reach for many promising young people. And it saddles those who do get an education with an unsustainable debt. Debt that causes them to delay buying their first home, put off having children, or give up the goal of starting a business. Today, Americans have more than $1 trillion in student loan debt. They have more student loan debt than credit card debt. And the average graduate owes more than $25,000 when they get out of school. Getting a college education should free young people to achieve their dreams, not saddle them with crushing debt for the rest of their lives. College is already unaffordable for too many young people. But if Congress fails to act soon, that cost will go up again. On July 1st, interest rates on student loans are set to double from 3.4% to 6.8%, effectively socking 7 million students with a $1,000 a year additional loan cost. In Nevada alone, this will cost 26,000 students more than $21 million next year. We should be removing the obstacles that keep young people from getting an education, not erecting more barriers. But raising interest rates would put higher education even further out of the reach of many promising students. So last week, Senate Democrats introduced a proposal to freeze student loan interest rates at current levels for 2 years without adding a penny to the deficit. This measure is fully paid for by closing wasteful tax loopholes. Legislation being pushed by House Republicans will take a different route, sticking it to students instead of closing loopholes. Rather than investing in the next generation of American workers, the House bill would cost students as much as $6,500 more in interest than the current rates. In fact, passing the House proposal would be worse than doing nothing at all. We'd be better off letting the rates go up to 6.8% than passing the House bill. So passing the House bill or letting the rates go up to 6.8%, that's not the right thing to do. We need to do what we suggest. That is, keep the interest rates where they are. Under the House bill, students would pay up to $2,000 more than if we allow rates to double in July. But Democrats know an investment in education is an investment in our economy. So we'll fight to keep student loan rates low and hold back the rising price of education. Last year, after months of obstruction, Republicans eventually conceded to help us achieve that goal. After all, it was a great election year politics for them. This is what Mitt Romney said. Here's what he said about the effort to keep loan rates low. Quote, "I fully support the effort to extend the low interest rate on student loans. Even my friend, the minority leader, Mitch McConnell, said that there wasn't a soul in Washington who thought student loan rates should go up." We agree. But unlike Republicans, we won't abandon our commitment to students just because the election year is over. Can my Republican colleagues say the same? So I hope that they still share our goal of keeping the American dream affordable. And if they do, there's an easy way for them to prove it. Work with us to quickly pass our proposal to protect American students. Yeah, I was.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
recently we've seen troubling signs that there are some in the executive branch who would use the power of the federal government to intimidate political opponents. For instance, reports that the IRS targeted conservative citizens groups for harassing and discriminatory treatment simply because they sought to exercise their First Amendment rights of freedom of association and speech. Or during the debate on Obamacare, when the Department of Health and Human Services issued a gag order on insurance plans in an attempt to prevent them from telling their customers about problems with the bill. Now there are published reports that the same department is trying to shake down some of these same companies for money so that it can try to convince Americans to finally like Obamacare. And over at the FCC, the President's allies are trying to shut down or make it difficult for people who want to buy advertising to exercise their First Amendment rights to criticize the administration. There are similar efforts over at the SEC. It all points to a culture of political intimidation. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem that the culture of intimidation is simply confined to the executive branch. The administration's allies here in the Senate are trying to intimidate their political opponents as well. What I'm talking about, Mr. President, is the persistent threat by the majority to break the rules of the Senate in order to change the rules of the Senate. In other words, to use the nuclear option if they don't get their way. For example, Senate Democrats were incensed that Republicans had the temerity to exercise their advice and consent responsibility to block a grand total of just one, nominee to the D.C. Circuit. What did our Democratic colleagues do in response? They consulted with the White House and pledged to pack the D.C. court with appointees, quote, one way or another, meaning use the nuclear option. They're doing this because the D.C. Circuit, they're certainly not doing this because the D.C. Circuit is burdened with cases. Far from it. The D.C. Circuit is one of the least busy courts in the country. No, they want to use the nuclear option to pack the D.C. Circuit so it can rubber stamp the President's big government agenda, the same big government we've seen over at the IRS and elsewhere. But that's not the limit of the culture of intimidation right here in the Senate. Let's look at the NLRB situation. Despite the story that the administration and Senate Democrats want to spin, Senate Republicans did not block the President's nominees to the National Labor Relations Board. Rather, it was the President who blocked the nominees to the Republican slots on the NLRB so he could, once again, pack a powerful branch of government, in this case, the NLRB. Now, the administration sat on one of the two Democratic vacancies at the NLRB for 4 months. And then it waited until the middle of December in 2011 to send up both nominees for the Democratic seats on the NLRB while refusing to send up any of the nominees for the Republican seats. In fact, the administration sat on the Republican nominees to the NLRB for 9 months. Then, with no Republican nominees to the NLRB before the Senate, the President purported to appoint the two Democratic nominees to the board when their nominations had been before the Senate for less than 3 weeks. It was so fast, the Majority Leader didn't even have time to schedule a hearing. Our Democratic colleagues did not defend the Senate from the President's unprecedented and unconstitutional power grab. Senate Republicans had to do that. And now that the D.C. Circuit has found these purported appointments to be unconstitutional, and by the way, that was a unanimous 3-judge court, and other circuit courts are agreeing with its reasoning, what is the Democratic majority threatening to do now? It's planning to double down and aid the administration with its power grab at the NLRB. Specifically, as with their effort to pack the D.C. Circuit, the majority is threatening to use the nuclear option so they can push through unlawfully appointed board members over the principled objections of Senate Republicans. It doesn't seem that our Democratic colleagues want to respect the rules of the Senate or that they want to respect the rulings of our federal courts. It appears they just want to enable the President and organized labor to exercise power at a powerful federal agency without anyone getting in the way. So let's be clear. These threats to use the nuclear option because of obstruction are just pretext for a power grab. What are the facts? The Senate has confirmed 19 of the President's judicial nominees so far this year, 19. By this point in his second term, when my party controlled the Senate, at this point in President Bush's second term, when my party controlled the Senate, President Bush had a grand total of 4 judicial nominees confirmed. 19 so far in the second term of President Obama, Democratic control of the Senate. 4, second term of President Bush, Republican control of the Senate. Moreover, Republicans on the Judiciary Committee just voted unanimously to support the President's current nomination to the D.C. Circuit. And the Senate Republican Conference agreed yesterday to hold an up or down vote on his nomination, which has only been on the calendar since Monday of this week. Since Monday of this week, to occur after the Memorial Day recess. That way, members who do not serve on the committee, which is a vast majority of the Senate, could have at least 1 week to evaluate this important nomination. Instead, the majority leader chose to jam the minority. He rejected our offer for an up or down vote just 10 days or so from now and filed cloture on the nomination just 1 day after it appeared on the executive calendar. This is just another example of the majority manufacturing a crisis to justify heavy-handed behavior. As for the NLRB, Republicans are willing to support nominees who are not unlawfully appointed and who have not been unlawfully exercising governmental power. And regarding nominees generally, Senate Republicans have been willing to work with the President to get his team in place. Secretary of Energy was confirmed, 97-0. The Secretary of Interior was confirmed, 87-11. The Secretary of the Treasury was confirmed, 71-26. The Director of the Office of Management and Budget was confirmed, 96-0. And the Secretary of State was confirmed, 94-3, just 7 days after the Senate received his nomination. So these continued threats to use the nuclear option point to the majority's own culture of intimidation right here in the Senate. Their view is that you had better confirm the people we want. Confirm the people we want when we want them, or we'll break the rules of the Senate to change the rules so you can't stop us. So much for respecting the rights of the minority. So much for a meaningful application of advice and consent. Now, Senate Republicans will work with the administration and the Democratic majority, but we will not be intimidated. We will not be intimidated. We have principled objections to some of the President's nominees, and constant threats to break the rules are not going to work. Constant threats to break the rules are not going to work. We want to work with you, but these tactics are not the way to go about getting our cooperation. Now, the majority leader has twice committed on the Senate floor not to use the nuclear option. The last time was just a few months ago. These were not conditional commitments. They were not commitments not to violate the rules of the Senate unless it became convenient for political purposes to violate the rules of the Senate. The comments of United States senators are supposed to matter. Your word is supposed to mean something around here. The commitments of the Senate Majority Leader need to matter. We simply cannot start breaking commitments around here, especially on something that goes to the very essence, of the Senate. Majority Leader needs to keep his commitments. Now, I indicated to the Majority Leader I was going to ask consent, and I assume he has a copy of it. As I noted in the remarks I just concluded on the D.C. Circuit Court nomination that the Majority Leader filed a cloture motion on, last night, we've already stated that we've agreed to a debate and a vote. It came out of committee unanimously. We confirmed 2 judicial nominations just this week, and we have an additional 2 scheduled for later this week. I've already indicated the confirmations of judges this year are stunningly fair to the majority compared to a time when President Bush was in his second term and my party controlled the Senate. I again remind my colleagues, as I just said, we've confirmed 19 judges this year. We'll have 21 by the end of this week. Therefore, bearing all that in mind, I ask unanimous consent that the cloture motion filed on calendar number 95 be vitiated and the Senate proceed to the consideration of this nomination at a time on Tuesday, June 4th, determined by the majority leader after consultation with the Republican leader. Further, I ask that there be 1 hour of debate on the nomination equally divided in the usual form, and that at the expiration or yielding back of that time, the Senate proceed to vote on the confirmation of the nomination with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The Majority Leader.
this good man, Sri Srinivasan, was first nominated in June of 2012. He's a brilliant man, honors graduate of Stanford Law School. Mr. President, Justice Roberts left that court in 2005. We've been trying to fill spots on that court for all these many years, 6 or 7 years. The D.C. Circuit is is the court that some say is more important than the Supreme Court. No judges have been confirmed in the D.C. Circuit since 2006. It's an 11-member court established by law. To have it a 7-member court is unfair. We've had one woman, for example, Caitlin Halligan, highly qualified nominee, has been filibustered twice by the Republicans. She was nominated to fill the seat of Justice Roberts. This man we're talking about today has been nominated to a seat that has been vacant for 5 years. The 4 seats were vacated in 2005, 2008, and senior status by 2 other judges in the last year or 2. His nomination has been pending for 345 days. By far the longest of any of the judicial nominations, currently awaiting confirmation by the full Senate. Now, my friend, the Republican leader, talks about in Bush's second term, he didn't get many nominations. He didn't, Mr. President, because we approved so many of the first. Just the opposite with President Obama. 18 Bush Circuit Court nominees were confirmed within 7 days or less after being reported by the committee. A Republican-controlled Senate filed cloture on 3 Circuit Court judges, including some real controversial ones. William Pryor, Janice Rogers Brown, cloture was filed within days, less than a week. Mr. President, there has been a stall going on here in the Senate for years. No, it doesn't take a mathematician to figure it out. We're being held up on nominations and legislation. President Obama has been trying to have the people he wants as part of his team for 4.5 years. There are multiple vacancies in this court. It has been reported out unanimously by the committee. It's all this stall. Let's wait. Maybe they'll be able to render another couple opinions in the next couple of weeks, and for it to law which says there should be 11 people there. To pack the court with what has been determined to be the number of people that should be on that court? Is it right to have 6 members of the Supreme Court total? Are you packing the court because you feel what's called for in the Constitution? No. So, Mr. President, we should vote on this young man today so he can go to work and helping fill one of the 4 vacancies that have been long-standing in that court for 5 or 6 or 7 years. So we are going to have, unless there's an agreement, we'll have a cloture vote on him tomorrow. And if they want to use their 30 hours, which they're entitled to do under the arrangement that we made at the beginning of this year, they can use the 30 hours. But we're going to get this young man confirmed. It's the right thing to do, and we're going to get him confirmed clearly as possible. Having waited 345 days, I think he deserves this.
Right. First time this nominee, who was reported out of committee unanimously, appeared on the executive calendar was 2 days ago. President Obama waited years before making any nominations to the D.C. Circuit. Then he made just one, Caitlin Halligan, and this is his second nominee to that court. But more broadly, the issue is, how has the Senate been treating President Obama? We've confirmed a total of 190 Obama judicial nominations. We've defeated 2. That's 190 to 2. There are 70% of the federal seats, judicial seats, without any nominees. 70% of the vacancies without any nominees. Look, this is a manufactured crisis. And the core point here, I say to my friend the Majority Leader, we have a good relationship. We work together every day. But you gave your word to the Senate that we had determined what the rules were for this Congress. A number of my members felt that it was settled. We voted for resolutions and some rules changes at the beginning of the year based upon your word. It's important for your word to mean something, not just to your members, but to ours. And statistically, it's just not true. The math can't be denied. It's just simply not true that we've been mistreating the President in any way with regard to the confirmation process. And with regard to the way the Senate itself is working, you've been actually quite complimentary. And I give you credit for helping us get back to normal here. We're having regular process on bills. WERDA was a good example, where we're calling up bills. Many of them we're getting on without even a motion to proceed. Based upon the Majority Leader's representation, we're going to have votes. And by golly, we've been having votes, and amazingly enough, senators like that. They're not marginalized by a process under which they don't get to participate. So I think we've made an enormous amount of progress, and I just want to make sure the Majority Leader intends to keep his word so that we can continue to have the kind of collegial, constructive atmosphere we've had this year in the Senate throughout the balance of this Congress.
Mr. President. Mr. President, we have to work together here, but it's a mutual work. It's not all on one side. It's not my word versus somebody else's word. In 2005, we had a knockdown, drag-out battle here, where my friend, the Republican leader, along with others, gave speeches here on the floor that the process regarding judges wasn't moving along quickly enough. As a result of that crisis, in an effort to resolve this matter, we agreed to put some people on the bench that we have regretted since then. Janice Rogers Brown, Thomas Griffith, Brett Kavanaugh. But we agreed that. They're on the court now. We need a balance. Now, my friend has focused on the judiciary, on judicial nominations. We've been doing better there, but other nominations, not so. We can talk about all the rights of minority and all that. You know, President of the United States, whether it's George Bush or President Obama or Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton, whoever it might be, deserve the right to have people work that they want to work there and not be held up for months and months to fill some of these minor posts. I could run through lists of names that are held up, been held up for a long time. So, Mr. President, my friend, the Republican leader, said during the squabble we had previously how he agreed with the fact that we should change the rules. I'm not saying we're going to change the rules, but I'm saying that we have to do a better job in what's going on around here. This is no threat. Just you need to look at the facts. Look at the facts. So we're going to continue working to try to work through this morass we have here. But let's not focus only on the judiciary. We have a lot of problems with regular nominations. I haven't talked about legislation. We're doing a little better on that. But, Mr. President, a perfect example of that is what's going on with the budget. People begged around here, yelled, screamed, fought for regular order. They get it. They don't want it. So, Mr. President, I am convinced that we need to move forward. I think one of the things we should do, somebody's been reported out of the committee 18-0, and there have been vacancies for 6 or 7 years. We should do that immediately, not wait for a couple weeks to do it. And if somebody really cares about this good man, his record's available. They could read it in 10 minutes. So I am sorry I had to object to my friend's unanimous consent request, but it was easy to do because the request is simply wrong.
Mr. President, let me just thank the Republican leader. Thank my friend, the Majority Leader, for confirming that he intends to keep his word. And with regard to non-judicial nominations, the facts are not irrelevant. Of the 33 nominations in the Senate that we've acted on this year, this calendar year, cloture's been required on 3, Brennan, Hagel, and Halligan, and cloture was not invoked on only 1. We've confirmed 33 boards and actually judges, agencies, 33 nominations confirmed this year. Cloture was required on only 3, and cloture was not invoked on only 1. My only point to my friend, the Majority Leader, is the math is hard to dispute. We have made a major effort here to move the Senate back in the direction that I know the Majority Leader and I agree on the way the Senate ought to operate. We've made major progress. And I think that progress needs to be recognized. And my friend, the Majority Leader, said it on various occasions this year in connection with bills that we processed in a fair and open way with plenty of amendments and an opportunity for everybody to be involved. So let's tone down the rhetoric. And I want to say again, I appreciate the Majority Leader's commitment to keep his word. It's important around here. It has a lot to do with how we go forward. And so I think this conversation this morning has been constructive, and I thank him. I'm sorry that he feels we can't wait 10 days to do this nominee, particularly since there are circuit judges, I believe, and maybe districts as well, already on the calendar. And the way we've been trying to do it around here that I thought you all agreed with, we'd sort of take them up in the order that they came out and appeared on the calendar. I know, for example, there's a judge from Wyoming, the senators from Wyoming of my party, or 4, and they're asking me, you know, why is this particular nominee jumped over their nominee? Because we've been kind of sequencing these, I believe, have we not, as they come out. So here we have a nominee that we all agree on, a court that's not overloaded with work, a nomination only recently made and recently confirmed, and the only dispute here seems to be over whether we do it this week or a week from now. Thus, my friend, that's why I called it a manufactured crisis. I mean, there's no crisis here. We're not arguing over this nominee. We like him. So, you know, the majority leader can make us have a cloture vote this week, and he can skip over the judges that have been waiting, that came out of committee and are on the calendar. If he chooses to, there's some advantages to being the majority leader. But goodness gracious, we have enough arguments over here over things that we disagree on. It sounds to me like we're having an argument over something we agree on. So I would hope we could tone down the rhetoric and continue the good way we've been operating this year. We've got big controversial issues coming our way. Let's don't make, you know, being a senator and functioning in the Senate any more difficult than it is anyway, because we have big differences about the future of the country. But let's have those debates in a collegial way and not manufacture crises that really don't exist.
Mr. President.
The majority leader.
Everyone knows that numbers, you can show anything you want with numbers. The fact is that there's been a slow walking down of the President's nominations. And we can look at how they do that. It's been interesting. It's a new way of doing things right here. A nominee comes up, and what the committee does is submit hundreds and hundreds of questions. One of our nominees got 1,000 questions in writing that person had to respond to. I mean, that's never happened before. We have all these ways of stalling. Now, Mr. President, I know that the senators from Wyoming, one of them spoken to me about Gregory Allen Phillips to be a circuit court judge for the 10th Circuit. Let's do him right now. Let's do him today. The Wyoming senator shouldn't have to wait. And that's why I would ask consent that we do, and I'm sorry, you know, I like him, the man who is going to be, we're going to invoke cloture on. He graduated law school with my son. He's a fine man. But I'm not the only one that messes his name up, Mr. President. He told me he was a basketball player in Kansas. And he said his parents came to all of his games, and they cringed every time his name was pronounced because it's a hard name to pronounce. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the time be determined by me that we proceed to counter number 95. That's Sri Srinivasan. There will be hour of debate equally divided in the usual form, that upon the usual reading back at that time, the Senate proceed to vote with no intervening action or debate on this nomination. Motion reconsidered may be laid on the table, no intervening action or debate, no further statements being ordered of the nomination. Any statements related to the nomination be printed in the record, and the President Obama be immediately notified of the Senate's action in the Senate, then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The Republican leader.
Again, I think what we're witnessing here is a manufactured crisis. We're doing 4 judges this week, this very week, 4 judges. There are 5 others that are on the calendar before the nominee, the majority leader, has been trying to get us to process this week. I think it's a better process, a better policy just to continue to set votes as the facts show in a timely way. Why are we doing this? We're not having a problem confirming judges. I don't understand. Why are we doing this? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, we've got big issues coming our way on immigration, for example. They're going to be very controversial. Members on both sides have been making every effort to tone down the rhetoric, to get us in the proper place, to deal with a very, very difficult and contentious piece of legislation. Why are we doing this? What is the point? All of these judges are going to be approved within a relatively short period of time in an orderly process that we've been working on all year, that has produced 4 times as many judicial confirmations for President Obama in his second term as President Bush had at this point in his first term when he had a Republican Senate. This is an unprecedented, rapid pace for confirmations. So I would say to my friend, why are we doing this? I'm going to object, but I'd like to know what the point is here. What is the problem?
Mr. President, I'll be happy to respond to what the problem is.
Majority Leader.
Senator Leahy said yesterday and I quote, "A recent report by the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service compares the whole of President Obama's first term to the whole of President Bush's first term, and the contrast could not be more clear. The median Senate floor time for President Obama's district court nominees was 5 times longer than President Bush's. President Obama's circuit court nominees faced even longer delays, and their median wait time was 7.3 times longer than for President Bush's circuit nominees. The comparison is even worse if we look just at nominees who were reported and confirmed unanimously. President Bush's unanimously confirmed circuit nominees had a median wait time of 14 days. Compare that to the 130 and a half days for President Obama's unanimous nominees. 14 days compared to 130 and a half. Are things going along really well? I don't think so. And on with what Senator Leahy said. That is more than 9 times longer. Even the nonpartisan CRS called this notable change. There is no good reason for such unprecedented delays, but those are the facts. So that's why we're doing this. There is no reason to wait 10 days or 2 weeks for this good man to fill a court who's been waiting for people to get on the court for 7 years. You have a majority in that court that is wreaking havoc with the country. For the first time in 230 years, they ruled the president can't make a recess appointment. So yes, there is a crisis, and we need to do something about it. And one way to resolve part of it is to get this good man on the court now.
Mr. President, so I gather, listen to the majority
Leader.
The whole purpose here is to stack the court. So the real issue here, I guess, is that he disagrees with the rulings on the D.C. Circuit. Look, we've been voting to confirm judges that we know we won't prefer the outcome of their decisions. But it sounds to me like the majority leader's finally kind of fessed up here to what the real problem is. The reason it needs to be done this week versus next week is because he doesn't like what the D.C. Circuit's doing. So it doesn't have anything to do with caseload or anything else. In fact, what's unprecedented is confirming a D.C. Circuit Court judge is 2 days after he's been on the calendar. 2 days. Goodness. What is the difference between now and next week? I find it impossible to understand. In fact, I don't understand why we're having this whole discussion this morning. We got plenty of things to debate around here and plenty of things we disagree upon. We've had an orderly process. This Congress has done well. 19 judges compared to 4 for President Bush at this point. I don't know if there's still a consent pending. I object. I think the majority leader and I
Objection is heard.
I think the majority leader and I ought to sit down like we normally do and figure this out and eliminate a manufactured crisis and go forward.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
in school we studied a lot of things, but one of the things I can't forget is George Orwell's 1984. It was an interesting book because in that book he talked about people coming to a time when whatever they said was just factually just the opposite. And here's where we are here now. The D.C. Circuit has legislatively been determined that they should have 11 members. And my friend says we're stacking the court. There's 4 vacancies. Stacking the court by having 8 there instead of 7, that math isn't very good, Mr. President. And my friend keeps talking about the D.C. Circuit doesn't have anything to do. The D.C. Circuit is now more than 1/3 vacant, 4 judicial vacancies. Mr. Cervanson is nominated to the 8th seat on the D.C. Circuit. 3 still remain empty. And yes, the country is concerned about the decisions coming out of that court. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is considered by some the most important court in the land, but by virtually everybody the second most important court in the land because of the complex nature of the cases they handle. The court reviews complicated decisions and rulemaking of many federal agencies, and in recent years has handled some of the most important terrorism and enemy combatant and detention cases since the attacks of September 11th. These cases are very complex in nature, requiring additional time for consideration. Congress took action to address these concerns about their caseload by decreasing the number of judgeships in 2008 from 12 to 11. Congress has set the number of judgeships needed by the court at 11. The court should not be understaffed by 1/3. In reality, according to the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, the caseload per active judge has increased by 50% since 2005 when the Senate confirmed President Bush's nominee to fill the 11th seat on the D.C. Circuit. So, Mr. President, Senate Republicans willingly confirmed President Bush's nominees for the 9th, 10th, and 11th seats on the D.C. Circuit. We didn't think they were stacking it. I didn't particularly like some of the people they put on there, but it wasn't stacking it. That's what the legislation called for. This good man is President Obama's second nominee to the D.C. Circuit to fill the 8th seat, and they filibustered Halligan twice. So, Mr. President, this is a situation that needs to be resolved quickly. You can't have the second or first most important court in the land 1/3 vacant. We're stacking the court with one person? I think not. So, Mr. President, we can stay here longer, but I've made my point. And one thing I have said to my friend, we've gotten a few of these little conversations before on the floor, I'll wind up getting the last word.
Yeah, I know the majority leader will always have the last word. That's the advantage of being in the majority and not the minority. I think it's been actually a good discussion this morning. I think we've demonstrated there's no real problem here. We've confirmed the President's nominees both for the judiciary and for the executive branch in very timely fashion, and we'll continue to process these judges in consultation with the majority leader as they come along.
Mr. President, the only thing I would say,
Majority Leader.
What about the judge from Wyoming? Why don't we do that today? Could there be a more Republican state in the country than Wyoming? Maybe, I don't know, maybe Idaho's vying for #1. But I'm willing to approve this judge today. Why don't we vote on him today? Well, if you want to go ahead and invoke cloture on, have us invoke cloture on this other guy, we'll do that. But I'm willing to vote on the Wyoming guy today.
The majority leader always reminds me that he has the last word. I'm hesitant to speak again. But we'll continue to process these judges in an orderly fashion as we have all year long, and hopefully he and I can discuss this further off the floor and find a way forward. I yield the floor.
One thing, I'm not keeping my word. I wasn't going to say anything, but I said I would get the last word. So, Senator McConnell, you can say something now, and I won't get the last word.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the Republicans controlling the first half.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arkansas.
I very much appreciate the gentleman from Kentucky and gentleman from Nevada having this very important discussion. Washington tends to operate inside of a bubble where one can easily forget just how much Main Street America is hurting economically, how many Americans feel their rights are being threatened, and how many fear we aren't going to leave behind a better country for our children. That's why it's so important that we stay connected to our constituents. That's why I travel home almost every weekend, hold telephone and online town halls from my Washington office, and try and read my mail, which is so very important. In a recent online town hall, I answered some difficult questions on the issues we're facing as a nation. However, one of the toughest questions that was posed wasn't about a specific policy issue. Instead, it was when I was asked, how do we fix the mess in Washington? I answered in part that transparency and accountability would go a long way to restoring the faith in Washington. That was before the Benghazi controversy escalated. Then news of the IRS scandal broke. Almost immediately after that, we learned that the Department of Justice had obtained the private phone records of dozens of Associated Press reporters. This is the opposite of what we need to do to fix the problems in Washington. These scandals move us in the wrong direction. It's hard to pick which one of these I find the most troubling, but I want to focus on the IRS scandal, because targeting political groups, singling them out for additional scrutiny simply because you disagree with their ideological views is wrong on every level. Dismissing this massive overreach as if there's just acts of a few rogue agents in Cincinnati, as some have tried to do since the onset, is not taking leadership, nor is it seeking to hold the agency accountable. We now know that the acting IRS commissioner knew of these abuses for at least a year, and that officials at Treasury and as high up as the Chief of Staff at the White House were briefed before the leak, despite the repeated claims that the administration learned about it through news reports. We know it wasn't just Cincinnati. IRS officials at the agency's Washington headquarters also sent queries to conservative groups asking about their donors. And progressive groups who operated the same way were not subjected to this type of harassment. On top of all this, there's real concern that IRS officials may have lied to Congress in an effort to cover up the agency's misdeeds. Yesterday, before the Finance Committee, the former head of the agency, who was in charge at the time of these abuses, claimed that this wasn't politically motivated, while at the same time he said he didn't know how the targeting happened. Along with this impressive double talk, he refused to apologize for the abuses that went on under his watch. Somebody has to be accountable. This is not a time for excuses. It's a time for leadership. The President needs to fully cooperate with the congressional investigations into the IRS scandal. Last week, our entire caucus sent a letter to the White House that demands at least this much from the administration. Washington's credibility, what is left of it, is on the line. The American people deserve to know what actions will be taken to ensure those who made these decisions at the IRS will be held accountable. The good news is that people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, are rightfully outraged. We're going to get to the bottom of this. People will be held accountable. At the very least, those engaging in the unethical actions need to be fired. If they broke the law, they need to be prosecuted. This scandal gives the already maligned IRS a black eye. It reinforces people's worst fears about Washington, that those in power will use any means necessary to maintain that power. Keep in mind this agency will be responsible for implementing and enforcing key provisions of the President's health care law, a law that a majority of Arkansans do not support. If these types of abuses are allowed to go unchecked, what kind of bullying will go on when that implementation begins? Especially in light of the fact that the official that was in charge of the unit that targeted conservative groups now runs the IRS office responsible for the health care law. Everyone needs to be treated fairly under the law. Clearly, there are employees at IRS who do not subscribe to this principle. There must be zero tolerance for the actions of those individuals. Until we change the culture here in Washington, we will not gain the confidence of the American people. The onus is on us, Washington as a whole, the White House, Congress, and every civil servant has to remember who we work for and to whom we are accountable. The actions of the IRS, along with the other scandals plaguing D.C., only move us further from the goalpost, not closer. Yield back.
Are they switching? Mr. President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, I rise today to discuss a number of ongoing controversies of national importance, including the IRS's unfair treatment of conservative groups applying for tax-exempt status, the Department of Justice's secret gathering of journalists' phone records, and the administration's response to the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Madam President, both the House and the Senate have held hearings with the former and acting IRS commissioners, as well as the Treasury Department's Inspector General for Tax Administration, who conducted an internal audit and authored the report revealing the pattern of government abuse within the IRS tax-exempt division. While I'm pleased that Congress is judiciously exercising its oversight powers, very few questions have been answered, and the pattern of inconsistent explanations continues. We still do not know why exactly we still do not know who exactly initiated the practice of wrongfully targeting conservative groups. Ironically, the acting IRS Commissioner, Stephen Miller, testified under oath that there were absolutely no political motivations behind the practice. However, Mr. Miller could not identify the names of the individuals whose motives he was supposedly vouching for. How is that even possible? Nebraskans know better than to buy that bill of goods. We still do not know why, Madam President, this abusive policy was implemented in the first place. IRS officials have maintained that the extra scrutiny given to conservative groups was an attempt to deal with an influx of applications. But as a number of fact-checkers and media outlets have noted, that surge in applications didn't happen until well after the targeting began. The reasoning for the practice put forth by the IRS then simply does not align with the facts. We still do not know why the IRS felt that it had the right to release confidential data, which it had wrongly requested in the first place. And they released that to third parties with adversarial interests to these conservative groups in question. The progressive publication ProPublica admitted it obtained from the Internal Revenue Service illegally leaked confidential tax forms from 9 organizations. All of the groups whose records were improperly released were conservative. Why did the IRS leak these records? What was their goal? And why did only conservative organizations have their confidential information leaked? Why did the White House senior staff, including the White House counsel and the White House chief of staff, fail to inform the President of this egregious government overreach by the IRS? Former special counsel to President Clinton, Lanny Davis, recently wrote an opinion piece in The Hill. Quote, "With all due respect to someone who has impeccable legal credentials, if she did have foreknowledge and did not inform the President immediately, I respectfully suggest Ms. Rumler is in the wrong job and that she should resign." Unquote. And as Politico recently reported, the story keeps changing. I quote, "The White House explanation of what it knew about the IRS story ahead of the first press reports on the controversy shifted once again Thursday." Let me repeat that. Shifted once again. It seems that some folks in the White House can't get their facts straight. Why? The White House press secretary admitted yesterday that officials in the White House discussed how and when the IRS would tell the public that the agency had been targeting conservative groups. The eventual public disclosure was made by IRS tax-exempt Division Director Lois Lerner, who revealed the pattern of government abuse with an intentionally planted question at an otherwise little-noticed Washington, D.C. lawyers' conference. It is outrageous that despite numerous congressional inquiries asking the IRS for answers, in both public hearings and formal letters, the IRS would first reveal the truth through a charade of a planted question. Then Lerner went on to earn herself a bushel of Pinocchios from the Washington Folks fact checker for her series of misstatements and Weasley wording. Whatever happened to the President's worthy goals of promoting the most accountable, the most transparent, the most open administration in history? I don't appreciate being misled, and Nebraskans don't either. Regarding the Department of Justice's secret collection of over 100 Associated Press journalists' phone records, two key questions remain. Why didn't the Department of Justice ask the Associated Press to voluntarily cooperate before issuing those subpoenas, as the law requires? And why did the Department of Justice fail to abide by the law and inform the Associated Press that the records were subpoenaed, denying them the opportunity to appeal that heavy-handed play? Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson put it well. The Obama administration has no business rummaging through journalists' phone records, perusing their emails, and tracking their movements in an attempt to keep them from gathering news. This heavy-handed business isn't chilling. It's just plain cold. But once again, the overreach does not stop there. Recent news has surfaced that a Fox News journalist was criminally investigated for doing his job, lawfully soliciting information from a government source. The Post describes the investigation in vivid detail. They used security badge access records to track the reporter's comings and goings from the State Department, according to a newly obtained court affidavit. They traced the timing of his calls with a State Department security advisor suspected of sharing the classified report. They obtained a search warrant for the reporter's personal emails. Madam President, this assault on the First Amendment is unacceptable, and the intimidation of reporters through unnecessary criminal investigations and excessive surveillance raises serious questions about the freedom of the press. The President and the Department of Justice have yet to come forward with credible answers. The American people are still waiting. Finally, I'd like to briefly touch on the tragic attack on our consulate in Benghazi. Much attention has been paid to the internal White House emails and changes to the UN Ambassador Susan Rice's talking points explaining the source of the attack. I believe that a key question still remains to be answered. Why, for 2 weeks, did the administration propagate the tale that it was a YouTube video-inspired attack when officials knew almost immediately that it was carried out by affiliates of al-Qaeda? That's a pretty simple question. Why were the American people told that an anti-Islam YouTube video prompted the attack when it is known that it did not? No one, Madam President, has answered this very basic question. Instead of providing answers to these questions, a top White House advisor has impugned the integrity of those seeking the truth by decrying persistent questioning as a witch hunt. It's time for the President to put politics aside, demand accountability from his staff, step up, and do his job. Congress is doing its part by conducting serious oversight hearings on both the IRS overreach and the Benghazi attack. Yet critical government witnesses, like the IRS tax-exempt division director, Lois Lerner, refuse to cooperate, insisting on pleading the Fifth Amendment during hearings to set the record straight. Madam President, it's up to the President. It's up to the President to transform this culture of arrogance and change the above-the-law attitude that seems to have a grip over his departments and his agencies. Ignorance, willful or otherwise, just isn't going to cut it anymore. We simply cannot afford to have a president on the sidelines. This unraveling saga of government gone wild demonstrates exactly one of two things: either the height of government incompetence or the gross abuse of power. And rather than sending surrogates out on a Sunday talk show to claim that the law is irrelevant with regard to that IRS overreach, I call on the President to work with Congress to build back the people's trust. This includes taking responsibility for the actions of those working within the executive branch, enforcing the laws, and removing all those responsible for this disturbing pattern of government overreach. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Republican whip.
Madam President, this last weekend, White House advisor Dan Pfeiffer visited all 5 Sunday morning talk shows. And what he tried to do there was to defend the Obama administration's handling of the various scandals that we are all too familiar with. Unfortunately for the President, I think he only made